All right, so sometimes you're probably thinking, what makes all this stuff work? And I think many people, when they invest in cryptocurrency, or maybe you're investing in technology in general, you don't necessarily understand what's under the hood. Today, we're going to try to dive into a little bit of that and really kind of dig a little bit deeper. My name is Paul Barron. This is TechPath. Welcome back. Today, we want to dive into something called the Lightning Network. And many of you, if you've been watching this channel for quite some time, we've had several people on who've talked a little bit about where the Lightning Network potential could be. So we decided to take a little bit deeper dive into what and how this thing works. Let's get Carla Kirk-Cohen on, who is from Lightning Labs. Great to have you on, Carla.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's get into a little bit about what your career path. We were talking a little bit before the show. Your career path in cryptocurrency, kind of what led you into crypto, first of all, especially as a developer, and what kind of helped you direct toward developing into the Lightning Network itself?
Sure. Well, I started out, I guess a good place to begin is what I studied in university. I was a computer science and economics major. So it was a pretty perfect fit for looking into the cryptocurrency space when I started to look for a job. And as a student, I was quite surprised, specifically as a computer science student, because you do your degree, you do the hard work of studying computer science. Now you think, oh, wow, I'm going to go into the job market. The world will be my oyster. And it is your oyster to a degree, but there's significantly less jobs available about things that you can actually care about as an engineer.
Right.
So sure, you can go work for a company that sells bottled water and says they're going to change the world, but it's a bit skeptical as to whether they're actually going to change the world. So when I was a student and I was looking for a place to land in my first job, I came quite naturally to a cryptocurrency exchange in South Africa called Luno, where I worked on the cryptocurrency operations and security team, predominantly with the Bitcoin integration there, because this was 2017, 2018, so there weren't really a lot of coins that were very popular back then. And spent a lot of time on that integration, and I was there for a year and a half. And over that period of time, it was really interesting to me working on the low level of how people interact with this digital currency, because there were a few things that would come up again and again that were issues for end users. So be it the chain fees would spike because the price was moving and people would complain about the price of withdrawals, or we had a merchant integration where there would be issues. It was the solution where Bitcoin would be paid into the exchange and the merchant would be paid out in fiat currency, so they don't have to accept the volatility risk, but they get the benefit of sort of global interoperability. And those merchants would constantly see issues like refunds or payments not making it through in the 30 minutes on the blockchain. So then the fiat quote is outdated, and really a whole bunch of growing pains for the Bitcoin network as it started to become more popular as a means of transacting. And around that time, the Lightning Network launched in beta. I saw a tweet by Elizabeth Stark, the CEO of Lightning Labs, about the launch, and I became really interested in this because it really seemed like a solution to a lot of our problems at this exchange and with our merchant solution. So I, as a very young intern, I pitched an OKR, so a key objective for one of the quarters, to implement a proof of concept for the Lightning Network. And I was amazed that someone actually said yes and let me do it. So back in 2018, end of the year, I think, Luno launched just on the API, so not in the app, not very widely available, but they launched deposits and withdrawals with Lightning. And so that's kind of how I started to get interested in this technology. After that, I was fortunate to be accepted into the chain code residency I was fortunate to be accepted into the Chain Code Labs Bitcoin residency, where I had 3 months to work on the open source software, which is LND. And thereafter, I joined Lightning Labs.
Right. So there's a lot to unpack there, especially isolating and telling the story there of how Bitcoin does have a bit of a challenge in terms of getting down to the transaction level that's going to eventually kind of roll into some sort of merchant service down the road for cryptocurrency or digital payments in general. Because right now, you have obviously the big networks, and whether it's the credit card systems, whether it's MasterCard, Visa, et cetera, And then the payment structures out there from Swift and the global currency connectivity. Then you have the opportunity of what is happening in cryptocurrency right now, which is literally taking what potentially is going around in terms of the development of the Lightning Network and making this usable for micropayments. When you look at the Lightning Network today, and now that you've been kind of programming on the network itself, looking at different use cases, is there anything that you say or can see that really kind of shines as the potential for what this network is going to be utilized for in terms of micropayments?
Of course. Touching on the Bitcoin scaling issue, I think that's always a really interesting comparison because people love to jog out this quote that the Bitcoin network can only transact 7 transactions per second, which seems
Right.
pretty shocking for a modern network payments network. And that compared to Visa, Visa has numbers like 35 to 40,000 transactions a second. So it seems on the surface like Bitcoin really isn't up to scratch. And what I think a lot of people miss when they have this discussion is that Bitcoin is intentionally slow and it intentionally has a small block size. It intentionally processes a low number of transactions per second. And the reason for that is on the intentionally slow side, because the Bitcoin network really values having a decentralized network of validators. We want people running very cheap, very small Raspberry Pis in their home to validate this network. And if blocks come too fast, those machines don't have sufficient compute to actually churn through all the EC operations and the cryptographic verifications that are required to validate a block and validate a transaction. And that's important because if you're not doing that, you might as well be running in a database, quite frankly. If people can't easily and openly join your network and validate that the transactions and blocks that are being processed are valid, there is very little value being added by a blockchain. The other thing is the block size, which has been quite a controversial topic in Bitcoin's history, but it follows a very similar pattern as the rate at which we mine blocks. Because all the nodes that operate on the network need to store those blocks, they need to download those blocks with their bandwidth, and they need to use their scarce resources to do so. Increasing the block size as a scaling solution doesn't seem very feasible for those small Raspberry Pis operating on the network. So instead of putting everything that we have on the base layer, I like to compare it to a software engineering project. Imagine if you put every single thing you needed for a company in one service or in one file. That would be disastrous. In software engineering, we value modularity, we value packages, and to the same degree in the Bitcoin network, we value layers. So we have our strong and steady and reliable Bitcoin base layer, which plods along very slowly, validating transactions and blocks. But what we do with the Lightning Network is we lift those transactions off the base layer and achieve instant and much, much cheaper transactions without giving up on any of the security guarantees of the base layer and while still transacting natively in Bitcoin. So where this technology can go, I think it's a bit of a cheap answer for me to say anywhere, but it really is amazing to me how many possibilities this does open up. The first one that you mentioned was micropayments. When I first got involved in the Lightning Network, my first mainnet transaction was on a website called Satoshi's Place, which is a virtual graffiti board. Don't open it in front of your kids. And what you can do on that is make a small drawing on the screen and you pay per pixel, right? You pay, I think it was 1 Satoshi per pixel to post your drawing to this virtual drawing board. And I did this, I wrote my name, I didn't do anything too risque on it, which most people tend to do their first time. And I sent this payment to the developer who hosts the server and runs the service. And I think it was 10 US dollar cents. And I'm sitting in Cape Town, South Africa. And if we just walk through what it would take for me to make a 10 US dollar cents payment to someone who's sitting in the United States, I mean, I would have to go for a COVID test today, but that wasn't the case back then. I would have to buy a $1,000 ticket. I would have to fly 25 to 32 hours to the United States because the flight path from my country stops over in Dubai and then arrives in New York. I would need to exchange my South African rands for cash. I would need to get a dollar in my hand. I would need to go to a convenience store, purchase something that cost 90 cents to get my 10 cents, and then get in an Uber and find this developer to pay him 10 cents, right? And that's just an unbelievable set of steps to make a small payment, to the point where we've never really thought what we could do with small payments because they've been so infeasible for so long. And
Right.
with this technology, we can start to think about completely different things. We can think about spam prevention on Twitter. You think of all the bots on Twitter that are posting rubbish and upvoting fake news. If we charge someone a quarter of a cent per 100 tweets, it would never affect the end user, but it would certainly affect all the spam farms that are posting these junk links and upvoting things that are false. We can look at payment for APIs. So many companies use services like Cloudflare to prevent themselves from being denial of service by repetitive requests to their API.
Right.
And what we do at Lightning Labs is we leverage the Lightning Network. So all of our APIs are protected by a very small payment. So if you want a denial of service one of our endpoints, you're almost welcome to, because you're paying to do so. The end user isn't affected because it's such a small amount, but the spam and attacking case is really addressed by that kind of micropayment. And I think it begins to open up possibilities on the internet that we've never really thought about before this technology was available.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get lost in the micropayment side of it becoming something that can pay for a cup of coffee. It's always the example somebody gives. And I think what you're talking about is much more, to me, much more interesting in terms of, especially around spam and the bot control scenarios. That, I mean, just YouTube alone would be another example of being able to control bots, and we have that on our own channel here. That is a constant problem. We had a gentleman on the show not too long ago that also have implemented the Lightning Network on podcasting 2.0, which was essentially giving the creators the ability through micropayments via the Lightning Network to really kind of pay the creator directly through sats. So I kind of see there's a big opportunity here in places that many people have not really considered, which I think is kind of interesting of how and what the Lightning Network can do and really kind of evolve to. I know when it was first started, the mainnet, there was a lot of testing and development going on. How stable is the network right now in terms of being able to transact at high scale?
The network right now is processing larger and larger payments every day. For a long period of time, we were seeing failures in the network because the network consists of these tubes of balance, right? And while the network was in really early stages, all of the implementations agreed to have a natural cap on the amount of money that you could lock up in a channel. It was really small. It was 0.16 BTC. So people were using Lightning and they were seeing large failures because these channels were quite small. They couldn't
Right.
transact with large amounts. So I think where we've really grown over the last year or so is the introduction of unbounded channel sizes, which is still opt-in. So obviously, if you're a small user, you don't need to put a lot of funds on Lightning. That's one of the great things about it. But that has really helped with kind of getting the payment success rate up. And the other thing that's helped is sort of sophistication in the routing algorithms used by the various implementation. We've done a lot of work there, and the work that we've done in L&D, sort of probability-based routing, paired in with Dijkstra's algorithm, which we use to calculate a route, which has also been supported by a few research papers on payment success in the network. So that's really been wonderful. To give you some numbers, it's very difficult to give numbers which provide the success rate or the transactions per second of the Lightning Network because everything in the network is onion routed. So it's inherently private. You don't know how many transactions are being processed. But if I take the recent Bitcoin 2021 conference, the Mint Gox gaming competition ran. So they ran a fascinating gaming competition. And over the weekend, I think that they processed 35,000 transactions in a day with no strain.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so you're talking about L&D, basically one of the core protocols, programming language for Lightning and Google Go, of how all that connects. Then you've got things like these, I guess, plugins that can be utilized through development platform or development programming languages like Python. If you being a young developer, if you were kind of coaching up someone in the maybe going to college right now or maybe re-entering school, and especially in computer science, that's my degree and background, what would you tell them to kind of focus on in terms of kind of the futuristic opportunities of programming software and language? Where would you tell them to go or try to get their skill set honed in on today?
Well, I think if you're looking at a base skill set to work in this industry, the combination of Rust, Go, and Python is pretty compelling. That seems to be where a lot of projects are working. And they're also very secure languages for systems development. In terms of getting involved in this industry, I'd say it's a very interesting industry to get involved in as a student or as a newer developer because it is predominantly built on free and open source software. And the
Right.
ability to make small contributions to these projects on the weekend, if you just spend some time tagging issues or answering other people's questions on a repo, it's incredible the engagement that you will get from the people that maintain that repo. I mean, that's how I got started on L&D. We were using it at work and I needed a feature changed or a field added. So I went and I made a pull request to L&D and the employees of Lightning Labs very promptly responded, reviewed it, merged it, and I got to contribute to the project in a way that was hopefully helpful to other people other than myself. So that's an incredible space with a lot of learning available. Whereas often it can feel like you don't really have any practical way to get involved in engineering till you begin to intern or you begin to work. Giving contributions to open source software provides a different and very rewarding path.
Right. Well, I think, for young programmers and developers and people that are kind of in that state in their career, because a lot of people now are looking, do I go to Silicon Valley, at least here in the US? Do I go to Silicon Valley? Do I work for Google, Facebook, the typical social media outlet? Or kind of this evolution that is happening, or I should say revolution that's happening in blockchain, because the number of blockchain projects, especially on layer 2 and DeFi, are just absolutely exploding. And then, of course, Lightning Network is becoming a very interesting platform that I think a lot of people are, if they're in the space and really understanding where the opportunities lie, could really kind of move into maybe a complete new career path for what's going to happen in terms of software development, for sure. Let's talk quickly about some of the latest happenings that are occurring. One is all these financial institutions that are starting to shift over. Obviously, we saw El Salvador. We've seen other countries start to embrace cryptocurrency and digital assets in general going forward. Do you feel like the payment architectures and the old guard payment systems that are out there are ready for a new way of doing things?
I don't think the existing systems quite understand the new way of doing things, which I don't blame them because it's an incredibly difficult thing to wrap your head around the concept of open networks, right? So if you currently look in the US, you look at something like Square or Cash App, those companies exist in competition with each other. They offer a similar service, but they're not interoperable. And the difference that things like the Lightning Network and Bitcoin bring in is that suddenly you're operating on an open network. So when Square joins the Lightning Network, it is additive. It only adds value to people in this network. When Venmo eventually joins the Lightning Network, it only adds value to people on this network. And it shifts us away from this old closed system, which has historically made the life of people in the payments industry incredibly difficult because when you want to roll out to a new country in a payment system, you now have to interact with a new set of banking APIs. You have to find a new set of payment processes. And having been adjacent to the payments team at Luno, I can really say that that is a large part of your development time that goes into just figuring out how these new markets work. And it really disincentivizes you to roll out in a large number of states or countries. So I think really what Lightning and Bitcoin and open networks and protocols bring is that global interoperability with no additional cost, and actually companies starting to enjoy the positive externalities of building on open protocols and open source software, which really gives them such a competitive advantage against the company that chooses to stick with the old guard and has to sit and integrate a new API every Tuesday if they want to expand their business.
How quickly before you think we'll actually see real life application for normal citizens of our planet here in truly digital transactions?
Well, I think that the use case is probably a bit less apparent for people who are traditionally banked and have a bank account and have Venmo. I can share a personal story, which is always pretty wild to me, that when I was in New York City at Chaincode Labs, I was a paid intern traveling in the United States on a J9 visa, completely entitled to be paid by an American company. But I found myself completely unbanked. So I went to the banks and I said, okay, can you give me a bank account? They said, no, you don't have proof of residence. You live in an Airbnb. I tried to sign up for Cash App. I tried to sign up for TransferWise. They said, no, you can't remit from the US if you're not a US citizen. And my employer couldn't just plug me into their payment software because my bank wasn't interoperable with their banks, unlike my
Right.
American and European counterparts. So I found myself in the United States for 3 months cashing checks at Bank of America, paying a huge fee to cash a check into cash because I wasn't a customer there. And then walking down the road to Dwayne Reed Pharmacy to purchase prepaid credit cards at $500 cap a pop and operating off of those cards for 3 months. And it was really grounding and eye-opening to me to realize how much of a cognitive burden it puts on you to not have a regular bank account. So I think that that perspective is not there when it's never been a problem for you. But if you look at countries like El Salvador, who've decided to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, 70% of that country doesn't have a bank account already. So to make the jump to
Right.
this new system is much more beneficial and much easier for them to do. So I think that in terms of people in New York City making a payment with Lightning, I think we're a while off. I think that it's going to need to get to the point where this technology is inevitable and the existing systems in developed worlds need to adopt this system because there's actual user demand. But if you start to look at different economies like Nigeria, like El Salvador, places where there's a much more felt need for this tech, I would say that within the next 5 years, we will have people regularly transacting with Bitcoin and Lightning, at least in El Salvador and perhaps one or two more Latin American or African countries.
Yeah, I think that's the key is we're starting to see development in a lot of these what used to be third world countries who are and have been in those kind of scenarios. But it's interesting to me that we're finding these third world countries which now potentially could become global leaders, especially in digital currency. One, because their infrastructure is getting set up for it, which is a huge advancement. And then also their society, their citizens are starting to prep for it as well, which means merchants, businesses, just general everyday transactions are going to start to really roll in that direction. So I almost feel like in some cases, these countries are actually ahead of the more technologically advanced countries, even though, countries like the US, the UK, et cetera, obviously we know what's happening in China with the digital yuan, but the acceleration point, I think, is really going to be there. And the question, I think, and I keep asking to a lot of experts, is when. And it seems like that 5 to 10 years is really, unless something big happens in terms of maybe like a digital dollar if the Fed were to come in, or if we get a central bank, scenario where it starts to really go after digital currency as a whole. Do you think that with the central banks moving into maybe a digital wallet, and creating that capacity to circumvent the banking systems themselves is going to advance or accelerate what's going to happen in the crypto industries and I guess technologies over the next couple of decades?
Well, I think when you're looking at things like a central bank solution, you kind of have to ask what problem are they solving? Because there's a very old joke in development about standards that there's two men and they're having a conversation. They say, oh, there are 15 standards for this one thing. We should make one standard that unifies them all. And then you see the next
Right.
panel, it says there are now 16 standards. So although something like a central bank digital currency tries to provide the same service as a digital currency that is decentralized, I don't think that it can unless it gets the buy-in from all the other central banks and all the rest of the world. So while that would certainly, say the US rolls out a central bank currency, that would certainly move the US into the digital space, I wouldn't really see it as a marked shift in the payments landscape because you're still ending up with this closed system interoperability issue. I
Right.
do think where that would be positive is that it starts to shift people's mindsets. So it's really important in this space that people approach it with education and caution and awareness of what they're doing. And these things seem very unfamiliar and very scary to a lot of people. It's really easy to forget how scary keeping money on your phone is when you've only ever operated with cash or a bank account.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Right.
think that they would have a positive impact there in terms of familiarity and perhaps people feeling like there's more legitimacy because the fact that decentralized currencies don't have any face or name you can blame is a pretty terrifying thing for a lot of people to wrap their head around. So I think there would be a progression there. But in terms of actually addressing a felt need, I'm not certain that that would move us forward.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think just the awareness of, Bitcoin in general, if you look at crypto and digital currencies across using digital wallets, it feels like it's a little bit more challenging to, and I don't want to get, to the point of demographics, but obviously the under 40 crowd seems to be much more accepting of this kind of approach toward currency and just value in general than what we've seen with demographics that are a little older than that. Even though myself, I'm over 40, and I'm a huge proponent and I embrace these kinds of things, but I'm kind of a different animal in terms of understanding technology and things of that nature, which is, I think, where some of the biggest challenges are for society in general. They maybe don't even realize how most of this technology works, which is the scary part, as you mentioned. So definitely a big one to overcome. But if a US digital dollar were to come out, obviously the digital yuan in China, they're already starting to move quickly into getting adoption across their society. If we get to digital currency in general, at least for the base layer of monetary value systems that are transferring fiat money, then the underlying layer of crypto, I think, is going to be a natural evolution of where our society will be going, which would be great because it will be, dollars on iPhones at that point. So it's going to be fun to watch, that's for sure. Last question, and that is Lightning Network. Where do you think some of the big opportunities in terms of development achievements are going to happen in the next couple of years? Anything big that's coming down the pipe?
I guess that we can talk about two things here. We can talk about the Lightning protocol itself, and we can talk about the kind of apps that we expect to see being built on Lightning. In terms of the Lightning protocol, the big one will be that Bitcoin has just locked in activation for Taproot, which is a change to the signature scheme that the base layer uses. And we expect that to activate in about November of this year. And that provides us with a really nice set of things that we can do in Lightning. We can switch up the way we make payments a bit in terms of the primitives that we use to create payments over payment channels. We can have much more private channel open and closes. And we can start to do some really, really cool things within Lightning, such as distributed log contracts, which allows you basically to commit to a contract and then use the input from an oracle, which will maybe post on Twitter or
Right.
anywhere on a notice board, and you can take the signature there and then use that signature to claim the output of a bet. So we had one on chain a while ago where two people bet on the outcome of the U.S. election, and an oracle signed a message saying this was the outcome, and then the winning party could claim those funds. And that's a really exciting way to start to build sort of DeFi-like applications on top of Bitcoin itself, without too much trust in the Oracle, because the Taproot upgrade will allow us to do things like, say, you will say 3 of 5 chosen oracles must pick this result. So there's less trust involved in that situation. In terms of the Lightning Protocol itself, we are working on a change called AMP, which is Atomic Multipath Payments. This will also just make for a sleeker payment experience on the network and enable recurring subscriptions, which is a feature that a lot of people have asked for. So you mentioned that creator economy. We think that adding that subscription feature, a static invoice, people don't seem to like QR codes too much, which I don't understand because I use them every day down here. But you scan a single invoice and you can now push your subscription to that creator, which I think is so important to move away from the pool model that we currently have with the App Store, where suddenly once a year this random payment comes off your credit card and you completely forgot that you had that app running. This subscription model, you can push sats per day, per month, per hour to someone to use their service. When you no longer want to use that service, you can terminate it. So those are the protocol side things. In terms of application development, I think things that leverage these features will be really interesting. So DLCs is a huge space. And really, if it does take off, because adoption is so much of this game, the creator economy can be fundamentally changed by the Lightning Network's technology. Like the ability to move away from clickbait and actually have a value for value model where you pay creators for what they make and for the value they provide you. We can look forward to a world perhaps where not everything on YouTube is all in caps and 15 minutes long, so they get more ad revenue from Google. But we can only hope.
Right. Well, you see, you're outsmarting the algorithm at Google, so that would be a bad thing for Google if we see this kind of scenario kind of come to reality. It'd be interesting, though. I think obviously the big Silicon Valley tech firms they're probably looking at this and starting to look at where the use cases are within their own networks and kind of where that opportunity. I see the gaming industry is going to be huge with this. Obviously, the podcasting side of things that we've explored here on this show. I'm always fascinated with where that evolution is, especially, on podcasting. I was really intrigued with what Curry was doing. Adam Curry, who's working with a small group of developers on the Lightning Network to develop that creator value for value system, which is kind of a very intriguing thing to me, especially as a creator, but also as just in general for society. I think it's going to be a fun one to watch. Carla, Kirk-Cohen, great to have you on the show. It was awesome talking with you, and good luck over there at Lightning Labs.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. All right, you guys are tuned in, maybe over on the podcast right now. Make sure and subscribe. Give us a few stars over there. If you're here on YouTube, make sure and subscribe on the channel. And you can also hit the notification bell so you get more info when we have content like this coming out. If you have an idea for a show, just shoot that to us, which is producer@revernetworks.com, or hit me up on Twitter @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.